The Diary of a Certified Psychopath. Off the crank. Etch a fetch. Blizzards of bona fide commendations are presently winging their way down to you from the digital cosmos's vast data repository, and shall not be subject to the usual delays so commonly associated with snail mail during the busiest time of a calendar year. Aside from completing a solid suburban bimble, mostly comprised of base-tempo salad spinning around a wholly improvised route, with some opportune Zone 4 stomps up its subtle slopes whenever a resurgent west wind was favourable, you also harvested the necessary provisions to satisfy your familial elder's scrupulous dietary demands, and successfully executed at least one instance of full-body teleportation, a transcendental art that it was previously believed could only be pulled off by the avatars within Zwift's mind-warping multiverse, since version 1.42, H.P. Lovecraft's most devout Cthulhucists, and Doctor Who superfans lucky or rich enough to have acquired their own functional TARDIS. Caution is advised that excessive use of this newfound skill may irritate your locality's more competitive crows, herring gulls, cormorants, pet racing pigeons, and other winged weekend warriors, including those piloting flying machines, all of whom are fairly contesting their own selection of perfectly straight Strava segments. And to conclude on a seasonal alert, 7 swans a-swooping would wreak untold damage upon both a pedal-powered magic carpet and its rider. More walking therapy. The secluded and raised footpath separating our peaceful peninsula from the River Ada's southwestern perimeter provides curious pedestrians the rare chance to view its quirky assortment of moored houseboats. Between their sturdy hulls and luxury multi-berth cabins, these dry-docked gin palaces embody a broader hodgepodge of architectural styles than could possibly be observed if one used H.G. Wells's time machine to travel from the Thames during medieval England to Port Tesla on Mars in 2099. Amidst the squally deluges that had drenched both my garb and gusto throughout this reflective ramble's middle mile, I paused to regard these exotic maritime abodes, which were stationed facing a gallery of tasteful Turner Seascape knockoffs, each appearing to depict the once seaworthy dwelling that now occupied a permanent space upon the opposing marshland. Though had I photographed every single artistic pairing, I'd have likely exceeded the solid-state storage space of Apple's latest budget smartphone. Amongst the most arresting to my impeded vision were a Toblerone-shaped, ship-lapped fortress too tall to fit within the vertical frame of an iPhone 16e's wide-angle lens, even when tilted to portrait mode. And the pictured single-decker bus, liberally scrawled with climate-conscious graffiti, itself stacked on top of a weather-beaten barge harbouring symbolic portholes. Amphibious vehicle out of water, or prematurely beached vessel longing to sail the tempestuous channel one last time? You decide. More carpet beating. A topographically comparable, but slightly less taxing paraphrase of yesterday's suburban slopefest, incorporating a handful more crit-friendly quadbusters that were omitted from what has always been an adaptable route by virtue of poor visibility and a compulsion to avoid any voluntary VO2 vortexes. Following the obligatory preamble to reach Shell Springs Rotary, which is presently hosting a nursery of coniferous juveniles, and bridge over the river's silty banks, a few further furlongs of charted tarmac led me to New Barn Road, which was attacked using momentum off the main drag, whereafter I dove right down Rosemary Drive and bypassed that hill nestled amidst its surrounding cul-de-sac complex, christened after spring's most fragrant perennial shrub, trying to imagine its intoxicating aroma being carried by breezes far softer than tonight's snarling mouth of the south, to the intense bliss of nature's bumbling pollinators, for whom such a bittersweet scent was no less bewitching than this flowering plant's royal purple shade. After cautiously negotiating the perilous double roundabout next to Shoreham's homespun retail park, where long-haul truckers on gruelling night shifts frequently hurtle off Hell's 27th Highway at velocities far too swift to make safe emergency stops, I bailed left at the latter's third exit, then braced my muscles for a concerted blast up Kingston Lane, swinging right again before running out of tarmac to the summit of Hill Farm Way. Under flat-out effort, this tricky compound ascent could be conquered in under 3 minutes by any moderately fit cyclist, and would hence require a controlled surge of power, averaging just below what should be sustainable within their aerobic capacity. Accordingly, mere yards before I reached the crest, my perceived pulse was sent rocketing towards Zone 5's upper border, and left a pair of lungs aching to supply 2 shredded legs with non-lactic haemoglobin, though Dr. Garmin's slack senses only caught up with cardiological reality some 25 minutes later. And no, this was not a case of the heart's delayed response to a sudden bodily demand from oxygen-starved muscles. Rather, it was erratic optical sensing technology snoozing on the job. Soft-pedalled my breathless way across the glowing gardens of Mile Oak, where unkempt privet hedges bore berries with pallid pink complexions, frostbitten by Jack's icy jaws, their brittle leaves turning ever greener in envy of the ruby fruits so effortlessly paraded by neighbouring holly bushes. After hanging left and spinning out the remainder of Portslade's subordinate suburb's namesake road, I ground my unsaddled way up Graham Avenue without snapping a hamstring, then cruised southward over several undulating crescents to the old village's nocturnally illuminated high street, where my supple steeds' rubber-shod hoofs still purred with pleasure as they rolled across a superficial homage to alpine asphalt. Being is believing. Ach, that acrid taste of rust that lurks in the back of one's throat after their lungs have been given cause to believe they've drawn one last breath for the sake of a stifled heart and burning muscles. How I loathe it. Even more than those little slices of death that some falsely believe the great Victorian horror novelist Edgar Allan Poe called sleep, which nonetheless was probably more hygienic in early 19th century America than the fragmented knick-knacks we're now permitted by a plethora of health-tracking devices, which keep waking us up to fulfill a litany of arbitrary move targets, whilst their parental smartphones bombard us with intrusive news alerts promoting paywalled articles below such provocative headlines as "Poor quality sleep will kill you quicker than falling buses." The above scenario could be defined as irony worthy of crashing into a no-entry sign, or a perfect example of the Streisand effect, whereby an unintended and diametrically opposed consequence of one's original actions is accomplished. Notwithstanding, if there was one short, blunt lesson that yesterday's brief but brutal episode of exercise-induced agony taught me, it's that the greatest gain comes from one's courage to begin, whilst all pain thereafter is optional. Rest, roll, and reminisce. The action during this tentative totter into winter's tertiary Sabbath picked up and closed down at roughly half the pace that a certain famous career sibling managed throughout 6 rounds of his hearty yet foolhardy punch-up against a bona fide British ex-world heavyweight boxing champion, embarking upon his own media-savvy comeback trail. Venomous upper gusts were there few and far between the mighty oaks of Southwick's village green, whose skeletal forms appeared twisted into states of wind-swept submission, personifying the festive season's bleaker side, and cradling nests long abandoned by next spring's leading flautists within their leafless limbs. Till then, such sweet dawn serenades performed by birds with golden bills shall be the proud duty of others perched upon rusty spades, climbing tinsel braids, and pecking berries off lush holly wreaths, before preening their bright red breasts in the vain hope of a pearly white carpet across which to dance their merry jig below sombre grey skies. "What a poetic picture you paint," I thought I heard a mercifully clement southwesterly whisper, whilst cruising down Church Lane under a dense canopy formed by deciduous sentinels in varying stages of delayed hibernation. Though come Christmas morning, you'll be lucky to be greeted by a solitary flake of airborne snow, let alone one that can sprawl upon the black ice and frosty vales that shall make a mockery out of every man-child aiming to take their souped-up Segway for a spin, and pretend they're Marty McFly on that hoverboard they never glimpsed amongst the corridors of board games, action figures, and pedal-powered Batmobiles at Toys R Us. We'll see. More lavish festive luminaries have I not seen outside of Santa's Grotto in Hamleys, on the twilight that Harrods, Tower Bridge, Covent Garden, Casper the Coca-Cola truck, and Oxford Street's branch of John Lewis collectively cried out, "Which incorrigibly treacherous toy store has hijacked our most radiant Christmas decorations?" Perhaps I'm biased, but the crowning star ensconced on top of our old village square's coniferous evergreen seemed to garner glowing praise from all passing citizens, whilst the infectious dazzle adorning its opulent branches could have outshone a pine forest filled with restless fireflies, and caused the incandescent flames of neighbouring street lamps to weave their brightest tangerine dreams. No less spectacular to my spellbound eyes were the sparkling Yuletide displays highlighting Shoreham's contemporary suburban dwellings, cascading in colourful canapes from their living room windows, where vivid vignettes of seasonal domesticity played out to a transient yet captivated audience. Altogether, not quite enough to melt the shivering heart of this lonesome traveller, voluntarily bereft of a merino wool base layer and touchscreen compatible gloves, but with small enough holes in their bamboo socks for an unpeeled satsuma not to slip through and become home-baked potpourri without the fair trade cinnamon sticks. Happy Christmas.